The cigarette smoke hung thick in the air of the copper room at the Sands Hotel, swirling under the hot stage lights like ghosts of broken dreams. It was March 1962, and Frank Sinatra stood motionless at the side of the stage, his ice-blue eyes locked on something that made his jaw tighten like a steel trap. On stage, Dean Martin was absolutely electric, his smooth baritone voice rapping around, "That's Amore," while the audience ate out of his palm. But it wasn't Dean's performance that had Frank's attention. It was the woman sitting at table 7, her red dress catching the spotlight every time she threw her head back in laughter at Dean's jokes. Ava Gardner, Frank's ex-wife. The woman who had torn his heart out and left it bleeding on a silver platter. And there she was, her dark eyes sparkling with genuine delight as Dean delivered his trademark drunk act with perfect comedic timing. Frank watched her lean forward, completely captivated, and felt something dark and poisonous unfurl in his chest. This wasn't just any woman laughing at his best friend's jokes. This was the woman who still haunted his dreams, and she was giving Dean the kind of attention she'd once reserved for Frank alone. Dean caught Frank's eye from the stage and winked, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his friend's face. He loosened his tie with that casual Dean Martin swagger that drove women wild and slurred into his next song, "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" The irony wasn't lost on Frank. That's exactly what this felt like. A swift, brutal kick to the head that left him reeling and seeing stars that weren't on any Hollywood soundstage. The Rat Pack was supposed to be untouchable. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford and Joey Bishop. 5 guys who ruled Las Vegas like kings, who could pack any room in the city just by showing up. They were more than entertainers. They were a phenomenon, a brotherhood forged in the neon-lit desert where money flowed like water and dreams came true under cover of darkness. Frank was the undisputed leader, the chairman of the board, the man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. Dean was his lieutenant, the cool customer who could charm his way out of anything while barely breaking a sweat. But tonight, watching Ava's face light up at Dean's effortless charisma, Frank felt the foundation of everything he'd built starting to crack. The Rat Pack wasn't just about entertainment, it was about power, loyalty, and the unshakable bond between men who understood that in show business you either ran with the pack or got devoured by the wolves. Frank had handpicked each member, molded them into something greater than the sum of their parts. They filmed movies together, performed together, partied together, and never, ever crossed certain lines. Until now, the memories flooded back like a broken dam. Just 5 years earlier, Frank and Dean had been unstoppable. Ocean's 11 had made them. Legends, not just as performers, but as cultural icons who defined what it meant to be cool in America. They'd swagger into the Copa room after filming all day, still wearing their tuxedos from the movie set, and proceed to tear the roof off the place with a combination of music, comedy, and pure magnetic charisma that no one had seen before or since. Frank remembered the exact moment he knew Dean was special. It was 1960, during the filming of Ocean's 11, and they were all exhausted after a particularly grueling day of shooting. The crew was packing up when Dean sauntered over to the piano, sat down, and started playing "Everybody Loves Somebody." But he wasn't just playing it. He was making love to every note, his voice soft and intimate like he was singing directly to each person in the room. Frank felt the hair on his arms stand up. He'd been in the business for decades, had worked with the best, but Dean had something that couldn't be taught or manufactured. He had that indefinable quality that made people stop whatever they were doing and just listen. That's when Frank knew he had to have Dean in his inner circle, not just as a performer, but as family. The Rat Pack became their playground. Las Vegas became their kingdom, and the world watched in fascination as 5 guys from different backgrounds came together to create pure magic. Dean brought the effortless cool. Sammy brought the incredible talent and energy. Peter brought the Hollywood connections. Joey brought the sharp wit, and Frank brought the vision and the iron will to make it all happen. They were invincible. Record deals, movie contracts, sold-out shows, and enough beautiful women to populate a small city. The money rolled in like a tsunami, and they spent it just as fast on custom-made suits, expensive cars, and wild parties that lasted until the desert sun painted the sky pink. Frank loved being the center of it all, the puppet master who pulled the strings and watched the world dance to his rhythm. But there was always Ava, beautiful, tempestuous Ava Gardner, who had married Frank in 1951 and proceeded to put him through an emotional meat grinder that lasted 6 years. She was the one woman who could reduce the chairman of the board to a lovesick teenager, begging and pleading like a common nobody. Their fights were legendary, their makeup sessions even more so, and when she finally walked away in 1957, she took a piece of Frank's soul with her. Now she was here, in his domain, laughing at Dean's jokes like Frank had never existed. The spotlight caught the diamonds around her neck, diamonds Frank had given her during their marriage, and they sparkled like tiny stars, mocking him from across the room. Every time Dean delivered a punchline, every time that famous Martin smile flashed across his face, Frank felt something precious slipping through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. Dean finished his set to thunderous applause and headed straight for Ava's table. His bow tie hanging loose around his neck, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. Frank watched from the shadows as Dean leaned down to whisper something in Ava's ear, watched her throw her head back in that throaty laugh that used to be his alone, watched Dean's hand rest casually on the back of her chair like he belonged there. The thing about jealousy is that it starts small, like a tiny crack in a windshield. You think you can ignore it, maybe even convince yourself it's not really there. But then the pressure builds, and before you know it, that little crack has spread across everything you thought was solid and permanent, turning your world into a spider web of fractures that could shatter at any moment. Frank Sinatra had built an empire on loyalty, on the unbreakable bonds between men who would die for each other. But as he stood there in the darkness, watching his best friend charm his ex-wife with that easy Dean Martin magic, he felt those bonds straining, like guitar strings wound too tight. Something was about to snap, and when it did, the sound would echo through the entertainment world for decades to come. The breaking point came 3 nights later during what was supposed to be a routine Rat Pack performance. Frank had spent those 72 hours in a haze of whiskey and rage, replaying that scene at Table 7 over and over until it became a film reel stuck on repeat in his mind. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, and when he did manage to drift off, he dreamed of Ava's laugh echoing through empty hotel corridors, while Dean's voice crooned somewhere just out of reach. The Copa Room was packed to capacity that Saturday night, the usual collection of high rollers, celebrities and tourists who came to witness the magic of the Rat Pack in their natural habitat. Frank took the stage first, his blue eyes scanning the crowd like a predator marking territory. He spotted Ava immediately. She was back, sitting at a different table this time. But still there, still beautiful, still dangerous. What made his blood freeze was Dean's empty martini glass, sitting right next to her champagne flute. When Dean strolled onto the stage 15 minutes later, loosening his bow tie with that trademark casual confidence, Frank felt something inside him finally snap. The audience erupted in applause, but all Frank could hear was the sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner trying to break free. Dean launched into "Everybody loves somebody," his voice smooth as aged bourbon, and Frank watched Ava's face transform with that same rapt attention she'd once reserved for Frank's performances. "You know, Frank," Dean said, turning to his friend with that easy smile that had charmed millions, "I was just thinking about how lucky we are. Good friends, good music, and—" His eyes flicked toward Ava's table for just a split second. Beautiful women who appreciate the finer things in life. It was innocent enough. Anyone else in that room would have heard it as typical Dean Martin banter, the kind of smooth talk that was as much a part of his act as the fake drunkenness and loosened tie. But Frank heard something else entirely, a challenge, a line being crossed, a betrayal disguised as casual conversation. The cigarette smoke in the room suddenly felt suffocating, and Frank's perfectly tailored tuxedo felt like a straitjacket. "That's right, Pally," Frank said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make the front row shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Some things are meant to be shared, and some things—" He let the words hang in the air like a loaded gun. "Some things are meant to stay exactly where they belong." Dean's smile faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across his face like a candle in the wind. He'd known Frank for over a decade, had seen him angry, drunk, heartbroken, and everything in between. But this was different. This was dangerous. The easy camaraderie that had made the Rat Pack legendary suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. "Frank," Dean said carefully, his voice losing some of its theatrical slur, maybe we should what?" Frank cut him off, stepping closer until they were sharing the same spotlight. "Maybe we should talk about boundaries, about loyalty, about the difference between friends and family." The audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that wasn't part of the show. "Because I thought we had an understanding about certain things, Dean, certain people." The words hit Dean like a physical blow. In an instant, he understood exactly what was happening, and the realization made him sick to his stomach. This wasn't about professional jealousy or creative differences. This was about Ava, about Frank's inability to let go of a woman who had nearly destroyed him years ago. Dean glanced toward Ava's table and saw her face pale with horrified understanding. "Jesus, Frank," Dean whispered, his cool facade cracking like ice in the desert sun. "She's your ex-wife. Your ex-wife. We had a drink, we talked, that's all. You're my friend, you're my—" "Friend." Frank's laugh was bitter as black coffee. "Friends don't move in on what belongs to someone else. Friends don't smile and charm their way into places they don't belong. Friends respect the rules." The accusation hung between them like a sword, and Dean felt his own temper finally ignite. He'd spent years walking on eggshells around Frank's. Volatile moods, smoothing over the rough edges, playing the loyal lieutenant to Frank's demanding general, but this was too much, even for him. "What belongs to you?" Dean's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. "She left you, Frank, 5 years ago. She's not your property, she's not your anything. She's a grown woman who can talk to whoever she damn well pleases." Frank's face went white with rage, and for a moment, Dean thought his friend might actually throw a punch right there on stage, in front of 800 people. The other Rat Pack members, Sammy, Peter, and Joey, watched from the wings in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing the end of something that had seemed indestructible. But instead of violence, Frank chose something worse: humiliation. He turned to the microphone, his blue eyes glittering with malicious intent, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I think my friend Dean here has had a little too much to drink. Tonight, maybe we should call it an early evening before he embarrasses himself further." The words were delivered with Frank's trademark charm, but they carried the sting of a public execution. Dean Martin, the man who had built his entire career on being the coolest cat in any room, suddenly looked small and broken under the harsh stage lights. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or flee, trapped between their desire to see celebrities and their discomfort at witnessing a friendship disintegrate in real time. Dean stared at Frank for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting hurt, betrayal, and something that looked dangerously close to hatred. Then, without another word, he set his microphone down on the piano and walked off the stage, his shoulders straight and proud despite the devastation written across his face. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, word had spread through the entertainment world that the Rat Pack was finished. Dean checked out of the sands. That same night, drove his Cadillac back to Los Angeles, and didn't speak to Frank for 6 months. Sammy, Peter, and Joey tried to play peacemaker, but the damage was too deep, too public, too personal to simply smooth over with apologies and expensive dinners. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed about the end of an era, about jealousy destroying America's most famous friendship, about the price of mixing business with personal vendettas. The Rat Pack continued to perform, but the magic was gone, replaced by professional courtesy and carefully scripted interactions that fooled no one. It was Dean who finally made the first move toward reconciliation, because that's who Dean Martin was. The guy who put friendship above pride, who understood that some things mattered more than being right. He showed up at Frank's dressing room one October evening, holding 2 glasses of Jack Daniels, and wearing that crooked smile that had launched 1,000 dreams. "You know, Francis," he said, using the name that only Dean was allowed to use, "I've been thinking, we're too old and too stupid to let a woman come between us, even one as beautiful as Ava Gardner." Frank looked up from his sheet music, his blue eyes softer than they'd been in months. "I'm sorry, Pally. I was out of line, way out of line." "We both were," Dean replied, handing Frank one of the glasses. "But here's the thing. She's not worth losing this. We're not worth losing this." They drank in silence for a few minutes, 2 middle-aged men who had learned that some mistakes can't be undone, only forgiven. The Rat Pack would continue for several more years, would make more movies and albums, would create more memories and magic. But something essential had been lost that night in March 1962, something that no amount of success could fully restore. Years later, when reporters asked Dean about that infamous evening, he would simply say, "Frank and I had a disagreement about a woman. It happens to the best of friends. The important thing is that we figured out what really mattered." But those who knew them both could see that the easy, effortless chemistry had been replaced by something more fragile, more careful, more aware of its own mortality. The Rat Pack taught America how to be cool, how to live large, how to turn friendship into an art form. But they also taught a harder lesson, that even the strongest bonds can fray when pride and jealousy enter the picture, and that sometimes the price of being human is watching your own weaknesses destroy the things you love most. In the end, they chose loyalty over ego, friendship over pride. But the scars remained, visible to anyone who looked closely enough to see the cracks in the perfect facade.